One thing that I find interesting is the sensitivity of statistical analysis. And, you often look at scientific results and you think that they're pretty robust. And frankly, I think a lot of scientific results are robust, but there is a lot of sensitivity in real world data. And I mentioned this before on this podcast. You really need to think about that sensitivity in the analysis, but it's hard to account for any of this kind of stuff. But it's not in the sense that you can't. Sorry about that. I'm driving home right now, hands free, and somebody on their bike just rode right in front of me. It was like, golly. You can't use, there's no way to account for some of these things other than through your subjective opinion with it. And it's just real world data. That's what real world data looks like. And there's lots of ways to there's all sorts of statistical techniques. And none of them are perfect, and none of them actually work that great by themselves. But it's the knowledge of all the different tips and tricks that kind of get you to sort of understand what's going on. And I think I am, and I've said this before, is I am in favor, although this is not going to happen in at least in our field. This is far from happening, but I'm in favor of abandoning regression altogether and abandoning statistical techniques altogether and just use data plots. We've got an infinite number of statistical analysis tools at this moment, and there's a lot of ways that you can play with these things in different sort of different ways, but creatively plotting data or thinking about data before you even start is more productive and makes you understand more of what's going on than jumping into anything right off the get-go. And understanding what you're looking at first is one of the more important things that we all should really focus on. The problem is nobody ever does it, and nobody's ever going to look at this kind of stuff, and that's the ultimate problem. And then we come up with all sorts of crazy ways to control for this and control for that, and ultimately I think what you just want is a picture. Just look at the picture, right? But here's the thing, if I was to send in a paper that just had a picture on it, like a graphical representation of data, people would not consider that as legitimate, and they would say, well, that's not legitimate in any sort of way, and they would throw it out. They would consider it null and void because it doesn't have any of these fancy techniques in it. But I know, and anybody that sort of works with data a lot and has a lot of experience with data knows that all of those techniques are incredibly sensitive in terms of, getting a quote-unquote robust result, which even with the graphical representation of it, you need to figure out what the heck are you looking at, right? You got to understand, what is it that I'm interested in? And even of that self is a hard question. So it's coming back, and that's why I think just looking at data forces you to realize what it is that you're actually looking into. And I am a big believer that by looking at numbers and looking at all of this, statistical significance and all that stuff, it's actually extremely problematic because we're not seeing really what's going on. And it is far better to just show, I would love to just show a simple data plot. And that's it, right? If you get what you're interested in your theoretical perspective right, if you understand it, in such a way that you really know what data that you're going to gather, and you just simply go gather it, right? Like, you just simply look at that and you just say, hey, wait a minute, I'm just going to do this. And once you do that, when you collect that data, it should be just a matter of just presenting it in a very simplistic way. And you should be able to see these particular results. But we tend not to do that. And it's not taught to do that, unfortunately. I stress it a little. I stress it a lot, actually. But I also have to show all of these other fancy techniques, because that's not going to be good enough. It's not going to be considered legitimate. And ultimately, I think all of those other techniques and all of those sort of fancy tools and all that kind of stuff ultimately just creates problems. And my perspective as an empirical person is to go to simple. To go to, can you present a simplistic plot of what you're trying to do? And if you can do that, like a simple, like, XY plot, right? Like a scatter plot, that this shows when this goes up, that goes. The problem is everybody's going to come up with all these different excuses and why that doesn't exist and all that kind of stuff. But the fact remains, when you see that, it means that that relationship may be there, right? And now we have to put in all of these crazy variables and all these techniques and all that kind of stuff, and at the end of it, you're left like thinking, what am I looking at here? And frankly, it's somewhat frustrating, because it's hard to even answer what it is that you're looking at. But if you have a simple plot that's X versus Y, and you've creatively thought about what X should be and Y should be in such a way that people think that this is a believable story, I think that would be good enough, in my view. I don't understand why we have to go through all the craziness of doing these sort of fancy techniques. Ultimately, those fancy mathematical techniques, that's all they're doing anyways. But what we need to do is let's go back to the basics. Let's really think about what it is that we're thinking about, and really focus on that over and over and over again, of what is it that I'm interested in. Something simple is like, how much money do people have? Now, is it the fact that you really, what is it that you're interested in? If you ask somebody how much money, so let's think about like company performance, and you ask them, did your company make money? What the hell does that mean, right? And so you have to think about, like, what is it that I actually mean? And then on top of it, like, thinking about, why should we be interested in this thing? And, maybe it's not actually money that you're interested in the first place, right? Like, did your company make money? But maybe it's like, did it capture some value? Or did it actually look at, did it actually create something new that wasn't created before? And then you have to think about that. Like, one of the things that I think is like bizarre, and to measure creativity, a lot of people just like measure the number of times that somebody has written down different solutions to something or different suggestions. And I don't know about you, but that doesn't seem like creativity to me. Should we actually be sort of measuring that? And if that's the case, well, what is it that we're actually measuring? And so shouldn't we have a better idea of what we're actually measuring? So instead of just like looking at counts and the number of things that people are looking at, maybe it should be like a weighted measure depending on the value of each of these particular ideas. And if we have that weighted measure, we should be able to plot that against something else that has some sort of a weighted measure as well that you're interested in, right? Like, creativity relates to company performance, for example. Well, you should be able to, at the very face of it, just show that. And yet we don't. And this is strange. It's just a strange phenomenon, I think, that I think we're getting far too caught up in all of the fancy mathematical techniques in our respective fields, and we're not coming back to the basics and just simply say, hey, does this actually show in real data? Can you actually see this with your own eyes? And if you can, then all right, that's cool, right? Like, can you show if you put more heat into into water, does it become more viscous, for example, right? Or trying to measure something like that, and you're looking at that particular plot, you should be able to plot that data in a very simplistic way. And if that's the case, then you're actually showing some real phenomenon, in my personal opinion. But you shouldn't have to put in a whole bunch of crazy things going on there. Suggests that there's just far too much what's going on. I think you need to go back to the drawing board and think about what you really are trying to capture. So with that, thanks so much for listening. Take care and have a wonderful day.